Okay, so you're here because you want to get smart fast. You want to learn something new. And we do just that. Today we're going deep. A deep dive, you could say, into a philosophy from ancient India that will really bend your mind. It's called the Charvaka Philosophy, sometimes also called Lokayata.
And you know what's interesting about this? It's not just some old, dusty history lesson. The Charvaka way of looking at things, you probably see it around you all the time. You might even think like a Charvaka every now and then without even realizing it.
Yeah, and even if you've never heard the name Charvaka before, this deep dive will unpack it all. With all the sources we've got, we're going to make it crystal clear. It's like getting a secret decoder ring for a whole different way of seeing the world.
Exactly. And the thing about these Charvakas, they were real rebels. They challenged like everything everyone thought they knew in Vedic Indian society. They really wanted to enjoy life here and now. And they were very skeptical of anything you couldn't actually experience with your senses. Like if you can't see it or touch it, is it really even there?
So where did this all begin?
Well, we think it started around the 6th century BCE. That's a long time ago. And back then, ancient India was like a giant philosophical laboratory with tons of new ideas and schools of thought popping up. Even the name Charvaka has a few different interpretations.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Yeah, so one interpretation comes from the term Charuvakya, which basically means one who speaks beautifully.
One who speaks beautifully. So were they known for being super persuasive, like amazing orators?
That's one way to think about it for sure. But there's another interpretation that focuses on the word charv. This means to chew. So you could say the Charvakas were people who really critically examined things. They kind of chewed on all the ethical and philosophical ideas of their time. Like they were constantly questioning and challenging the status quo.
So not just smooth talkers, but real intellectual heavy hitters, kind of like philosophical rebels. Who's the big name behind it all? Who started this whole Charvaka thing?
The main guy, the founder, if you will. This is a person named Guru Brihaspati.
Guru Brihaspati, okay.
Yeah. And get this. This is where things get really interesting. Some people think Charvaka wasn't Brihaspati's actual name. It could have been the name of his first follower, or even like a secret name he used when he was spreading his ideas. Supposedly, he was promoting these pleasure-focused ideas to a specific group called the Danavas.
Whoa. Secret names and secret groups. Sounds like some ancient philosophical intrigue. Okay. We also read about someone named Ajita Kesh Kambli. What's his connection to all of this?
Ajita Kesh Kambli was a super important figure in the Charvaka movement. He was known for his razor-sharp logic. He used it to argue that Charvaka philosophy was the ultimate truth. He was basically saying that other belief systems, they were just making stuff up. He really helped to make the Charvaka way of thinking popular.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture here. This brings us to Lokayata, which is another name for Charvaka. What does that tell us?
Lokayata basically means something like what's happening in the world or focusing on stuff in the world. This name shows us that Charvaka was a philosophy that everyday people could connect with. It was about the here and now, the concept of eloquad. So basically, they didn't worry about some far-off spiritual goal. It was about enjoying the life you have right now, the world you can see and touch.
It sounds super relatable, Russ. Like just live your life and be happy. But our notes say that Lokayata was also really controversial.
Yeah, that's right. Even though it seems like it would have been popular with regular people, Lokayata, or Charvaka. It was the most criticized out of the 9 Indian philosophical schools. They really shook things up. And the people who were in power, who supported the traditional Vedic beliefs, they didn't like it one bit.
So how did it get such a bad rap?
Well, it really comes down to a couple of famous verses. These are called shlokas.
Shlokas, got it.
These particular shlokas were written down in the Sarva Darsana Sangraha. It's basically a collection of different Indian philosophies. The first shloka goes like this. Yavat javite sukham javite. Rinam kritva gartam pibet basmiputasya dehasya punaragman kuta.
Okay, so break that down for me. What does that actually mean?
Well, it basically means live happily while you're alive, take out a loan, and drink ghee. Once your body turns to ashes, how can it come back?
Whoa. Talk about living in the moment, right?
Yeah.
This shloka is saying, forget saving for retirement. Forget the afterlife. Just enjoy yourself, even if you have to borrow money for some delicious ghee. That's wild.
And the next shloka takes it even further. It goes, Pitta pitta punar pitta, yavatati kutale, utechpurna pitta punar janmana vidyate. This translates to drink and drink again until you fall to the ground. Get up and drink again because there's no rebirth.
So basically it's saying party hard because this is all you get. It's a complete 180 from the whole spiritual liberation thing that was popular at the time. No wonder people criticized it. It's almost shockingly direct.
It definitely went against the grain. And it's super important to remember that a lot of what we know about Charvaka comes from their critics. Their original writings were mostly destroyed, so we're basically trying to understand them through what their opponents said about them.
It's like trying to figure out a band by listening to their rivals' diss tracks.
Yeah.
That makes it really hard to get the full picture, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. So the earliest detailed account we have of the Charvakas is from the 9th century AD. It's this book called Tatvopa Plavasimha. It was written by Jayarishi Paita.
Right.
Then we find some mentions of them in an 11th century play called Prabodha Chandrodaya. And later on, they're mentioned in Madhavacharya's Sarvadashana Sagraha in the 14th century AD. But the thing is, these are all secondary sources. So what they say about Charvaka is filtered through the lens of their own beliefs. Beliefs that were often opposed to Charvaka philosophy.
Which makes what Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan said about giving the Charvakas the benefit of the doubt even more important. Without their actual writings, it's so easy for their ideas to get twisted. Or to only see them from the perspective of people who disagreed with them.
Exactly. To really understand why the Charvakas emerged and what made their ideas catch on, we have to look at the bigger picture. And that means understanding the Srama Andolan.
Which was what again?
The seeker movement.
Right. Tell me more about that. What was going on back then?
Okay, so when Charvaka popped up, Vedic literature and the Upanishads were like the dominant forces in society. These texts, they talked about the importance of the gods, reincarnation, karma, and something really relevant to what we're discussing. They emphasize the importance of detachment, or vairagya, and the concept of renunciation, or sannyasa, which is basically giving up worldly things to achieve spiritual liberation.
Sounds like a completely different vibe from that whole eat, drink, and be merry thing.
Totally. The Shramana Andolan was like this massive movement of people who were questioning the Vedic traditions. They wanted something more. And from this movement, all these different philosophical schools started popping up, each with their own take on reality and how to live a good life. Like Jainism and Buddhism were part of this.
I've definitely heard of those.
And of course, Charvaka, which was led by Ajita Keshkambli. There was also Ajivika, Sasatvada, a Kriyavad, which is also known as a moralism, and Agyamvad, which is agnosticism. It was a wild time for philosophy.
So out of all those schools of thought, what happened to them? Did they all survive?
Well, Jainism and Buddhism, they became major world religions. Charvaka had its heyday between the 6th and 2nd centuries BCE, but eventually it got suppressed, mainly because it went against everything the Vedic beliefs were about.
Makes sense. The people in charge weren't going to stand for a philosophy that challenged their whole system.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've covered the origins, the names, public perception, the historical context. Now let's get to the heart of it. The ideas that made Charvaka philosophy so unique. We'll start with epistemology.
Epistemology.
Right.
Which is basically how we know things. How did the Charvakas believe we learn about the world?
For them, it all came down to perception. They believed that anubhad, or direct experience, was the only true source of knowledge. If you couldn't see it or touch it or taste it, it wasn't real.
That's pretty extreme, right? There are so many other ways we learn things, like through logic or from other people.
No, right. But the Charvakas, they were all about seeing is believing. In philosophy, there are 6 main ways we're supposed to acquire knowledge. Perception, inference, which is like figuring something out based on evidence. Testimony, which is what we learn from reliable sources. Comparison, implication, and even non-existence, which helps us understand what isn't there. The Charvaka said, nope, perception is all that matters.
So no trusting books or experts. That would really change things, wouldn't it?
It would, and a lot of people criticize them for it. They said our senses can be tricked, that just relying on perception give you a very limited view of the world. Okay, I see that. Makes sense. So what about their metaphysics? What did they think the universe was made of?
Metaphysically, they were materialists through and through. They believed the universe was made up of just 4 things: earth, air, fire, and water. That's it. Nothing else.
No spiritual realm, no universal consciousness or anything like that.
Nope. They even said that ether, or pure space, which a lot of other Indian philosophies believed in, it wasn't real because you can't perceive it. And another interesting thing, they were one of the only Indian schools of thought that denied the existence of a permanent soul.
No soul. So what did they think consciousness was? Where did that come from?
They said that the soul is just a body with consciousness, which obviously raises a huge question. How can a body made of just those four elements create something like consciousness? It was a huge point of contention, and people criticized them for it a lot.
Yeah, I can see why. It's like, if everything is just physical stuff, how do you explain the feeling of I, the awareness?
Right. It's a tough one. So to try and explain it, they use this analogy. Think about ingredients like grain and yeast on their own, no alcohol. But when you mix them and ferment them, boom, alcohol. They said that consciousness was kind of like that. When those four elements came together in a specific way to form a living being, consciousness just emerged as a property of that combination.
Interesting. So consciousness was like a side effect of matter being arranged in a certain way.
Yeah.
But I guess that's still a mystery even today, isn't it? We still don't fully understand how consciousness works.
Totally. It's a question that continues to baffle scientists and philosophers alike.
Okay.
So the Charvakas believed we know things through experience, and they believed that the universe was just made up of matter. That brings us to their ethics. How did they think people should live their lives?
Fill me in.
In Vedic philosophy, there are four main goals, or purusharthas, that people should strive for. Dharma, which is basically doing the right thing. Artha, which is wealth. Kama, which is pleasure. And moksha, which is spiritual liberation. And the ultimate goal was supposed to be moksha. Well, the Charvakas said, hold on. Kama is the only purushartha that actually matters.
So they were all about pleasure, like hedonists.
Pretty much. They believed in sukhwad, which is basically the idea that happiness is the ultimate goal. They thought you should get wealthy so you can enjoy yourself more. And they didn't believe in moksha at all. They said death was the only true liberation because it meant the end of consciousness and suffering.
Wow, okay, so what about dharma? Did they just ignore the idea of duty and morality?
They thought dharma was kind of like a mental prison, something that keeps you from being truly happy. Some Charvakas even said that all pleasure was equal. There was no difference between one type of pleasure and another.
Interesting.
But over time, they kind of refined that idea. There was a group called the Sushikshit Charvakas, which means refined Charvakas. And they said that some forms of happiness were better than others.
So it wasn't just about instant gratification then?
Yeah, they started thinking more about long-term happiness and minimizing pain. And to really see how much they rejected traditional religion, think about their view on Shraddha.
Shraddha.
Okay. It's a ritual that people do to give blessings to their ancestors in heaven. The Charvakas thought this was a complete waste of time because they didn't believe in heaven or hell, or even a soul that survives after death. They said that the only heaven and hell were right here on Earth.
That's a very, I don't know, down-to-earth perspective, I guess you could say. But even though their logic seemed pretty solid back then, our notes say there are some big problems with Charvaka philosophy when you look at it through a modern lens.
For sure. The biggest issue is that whole perception thing. They said perception is the only way to know something is real. But what about things we can't perceive directly? Like, what about bacteria?
We can't see them, but they're definitely real.
Exactly. And what about distant galaxies? We can't see them without telescopes, but they're out there. So this whole idea that if you can't perceive it, it's not real. It kind of falls apart.
Yeah, good point. And what about their explanation for consciousness?
Right. They said that consciousness is just a result of matter being arranged in a certain way, but they never really explained how that actually works.
It's still a big mystery.
And ethically speaking, a purely pleasure-based philosophy can be pretty dangerous. If everyone is just focused on their own happiness all the time, society would fall apart.
True. So it seems like Charvaka philosophy had some major flaws, but it also had some good points, didn't it? Our notes mentioned some of their positive contributions.
Oh, absolutely. Even though the Charvakas didn't last, they had a big impact on Indian thought. They were always asking questions, challenging the status quo, and that helped to make Indian philosophy more dynamic and less rigid.
It's like they were shaking things up, making everyone think harder about their beliefs.
And another really important thing, they were the only materialist school of thought among the 9 main Indian philosophies. So they provided a completely different way of looking at the world.
It's good to have different perspectives, right?
Totally. And their focus on the present moment, that's something that still resonates with people today.
Yeah, I can see that. We're all so busy thinking about the future or dwelling on the past. It's nice to be reminded to just enjoy the moment.
Right. It's like that saying, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. The Charvakas would have loved that.
So we've learned that the Charvakas or Lokayata were a unique group in ancient India. They believed in perception as the only way to know things. They thought the universe was just made up of matter. And they said the goal of life was happiness. And they questioned everything. They weren't afraid to go against the grain.
Even though their philosophy had its problems, it's still really important to study them. They remind us to be critical thinkers, to question our assumptions, and to be open to different ways of seeing the world, and their focus on the present moment. That's a message we can all benefit from.
Definitely. So here's something for you to think about. In a world where we're still trying to figure out things like faith and reason and happiness, what parts of the Charvaka philosophy are still relevant today? Think about that balance between what we experience directly and what we believe in, even though we can't see it. That's something worth pondering. Thanks for listening.